Hi there and welcome. This is Jennifer McGuire. Today I'm sharing more ideas for off-the-edge stamped cards. When you create these cards, all you need are stamps and the coordinating dies, and you can create unique card shapes. I find these super fun to make because they have a lot of interest to them, but they can be one-layer cards. I will show you a few options for creating cards like this so you can choose what would work best for you. And also at the end, I'll link to some other videos where I show off-the-edge stamping in different variations. You can use many different types of stamps for this technique. However, I will be focusing on the Hero Arts December My Monthly Hero Kit because these images are so much fun. This kit is a great value and includes this large 6x8 stamp set and the coordinating dies. So I stamped a bunch of these images on Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock, 110 pound. That's my favorite white cardstock. And I stamped it with a Hero Arts Intense Black ink. This is a Copic friendly ink, so I could color the images with Copics. So I did the coloring on the go. I took it with me, and now I have a bunch of colored images. And I'm lining up the coordinating dies that are included in the kit with the images and running them through my die cut machine. I also am starting with a 5.5 by 8.5 inch piece of white cardstock, the same white cardstock, and I'm drawing a light pencil line down the middle at 4.25. If I were to fold this, I would have a typical note card. Instead, I'm going to do a bit of partial die cutting before I score it. I'm going to place my image so it's right along that pencil line. You can see the pencil line goes right through the fairy there. And I'm going to take the coordinating die and place it right over that stamped image. The stamped image is just helping me with the placement. I'll put some tape on here so that when I run it through my machine, it doesn't shift. You can use different die cut machines for this. I'm using my Big Shot Express today. And I have rotated my paper in there so the fairy is upside down. And I'm lining up the edge of my top cutting plate with that pencil line. So the edge of the cutting plate will be right along the middle of that fairy image. That way anything under the cutting plate will cut, anything hanging out from the cutting plate on the right will not cut. So we'll get a partial die cut image. So I'll go ahead and run that through, and there you can see to the one side of the pencil line the image is cut, to the other side it's solid. Next, I'll score right along the pencil line, but only above and below where our die cut ends. So you'll see I did above it and below it, but not through that die cut area. When you fold the card, you'll see that it looks kind of funny here, but I'm just going to reinforce the score line so I have a nice fold. And then I'm going to cut off the part of that die cut that's hanging off. Now you could use scissors to chop this, or you could just use your trimmer as I am, but just be careful not to cut through the card. You're just cutting off what's hanging off of the card. So there we have that partial window right along the edge. Now it's time to glue into that partial window our little stamped image. You want to make sure you glue this on well because you don't want it to kind of fall off when the person opens and closes the card. So I'm putting strong liquid adhesive on the back of my little image here. And then I'll use my finger to kind of spread the glue around so it gets right up to the edge without oozing out. I'll then pop that into place. Notice I only put adhesive on the right side of the fairy so that that left side that's hanging off doesn't have adhesive on the back. So I'm going to press that down well and check it out. You've got this fun image where it floats off the edge and there's that partial window that shows through on the front. Now I want this to fit in my envelope, so I'm going to cut down my card so that it's 4.25 inches wide from the tip of her fairy wings to the right side of the card. So the height is 5.5, the width is 4.25. Now this may bug some people, it doesn't bother me, but when you open up the card, that die cut window doesn't line up there. It's meant to line up on the front. However, if you don't, that doesn't bother me, but if it bothers you, I'm going to show you some other design options you can try in this video that will give a different look. I just really like that flips open, showing the fairy from the inside and out. Okay, so I'm putting this into my Misty stamping tool and using my Misty Creative Corners to make sure that I have my image straight. And then I'll stamp that with black ink. I really like the sentiment that says, "May all your wishes come true," and I used it on all of today's cards, or at least most of them. And now I'm going to stamp some little dandelion images around it. These are also included in the kit. I put a little piece of tape over her dress so that I could mask it off and not get ink on it. So I have 3 dandelions here, and I want to stamp this super soft in a very light ink so it's not distracting. I wanted all of today's cards to be very clean and simple. So I'm stamping it with Simon Says Stamp Fog ink. I wanted a little bit darker than what the ink provides with the first stamping, so I stamped it 3 times, and I end up with the perfect, soft little dandelion images in the background. I used the glitter pen included in the kit to color in her wings and the top of her wand. This Stardust glitter pen gives so much glitter. You can do tiny areas or cover large areas as I did, and it gives you the most sparkle. So here's the finished card. I have an envelope where I stamped a matching fairy on the flap. You can see how it fit in the envelope just fine, and when you take it out, you have that unique shape design. I stamped a dandelion on the inside, and here's a closer look at the glittery look that we have on the fairy wings and the top of the wand. This is actually a 1-layer card, very simple design, and something that you can make lots of very quickly. Let's do another example using this same technique before we move on to other variations. For this one, I used the Hero Arts Lucky Star stamp set and the coordinating die set that's available. I thought these images were super sweet, but I wanted to keep the card very simple. Again, I'm starting with 5.5 by 8.5, drawing a pencil line down the center at 4.25. I'll take the coordinating die, place it over the pencil line, and the pencil line's actually going through where their hands connect. I rotate it around, put it in my die cut machine, with the top cutting plate only over half of it, right up to the pencil line, and there we get that partial die cutting. I'll do my scoring above and below the die cut lines, fold my card, and then cut off that excess die cutting that's hanging out. This is exactly as we did on the last example. I just wanted to show a variation. So now I can glue that die cut in place so the little girl is hanging off the card and they're connected by their hands. I just thought that was such a fun and unexpected look. I will say that it's best to do your die cut that you're gluing in place with a heavyweight cardstock, like 110 pounds. So she's strong hanging off the edge. She's not kind of wobbly over there. And this time I trimmed the entire card down to 3.5 inches wide by 5 inches wide. This is a 4-bar card size, so I have a smaller envelope for that. So here's the final card. I love what they look like when they come out. I added a sentiment from the same stamp set and a little doggy, and lots of stars up in the sky. I colored that main star with yellow Copic marker and lots of that Stardust glitter so it has sparkle to it. I think these images are just so sweet, and this shows you that really any shape stamp or die would work for this off-the-edge stamping. If you don't have the coordinating die, you can always use a craft knife to cut along the edge. Okay, my next example is the same technique, but instead of having one stamped image hanging off the edge, we'll have 2. So I'm starting with 8.5 by 5.5, and I drew a pencil line down the center at 4.25. I have these 2 images that I want to hang off the edge. This is very easy to do once you see it done and adds more to the card design. So I've placed my images where I want them to be, just holding that flower there. We'll die cut that first. So I'm taking the coordinating die and popping it around the flower, and then I will tape it in place and run it through our die cut machine for partial die cutting. The reason I have that image under there is I was using it to help me get the placement I wanted. Might as well just leave it there as we run it through. Okay, so now I will do the same thing as before. I will rotate my paper into the die cut machine, put the top cutting plate so that it is right up against that pencil line. So anything under the cutting plate will cut, anything hanging out will stay as is. Before we score along that pencil line, we need to also partially die cut the mouse. So I line the flower up with the die cutting, and then I'm putting the mouse on it just so I can get the placement just right. I can remove the flower, and then I will take the die for the mouse and put it right on top, tape it in place temporarily, and run it through our die cut machine again with partial die cutting. This way, the one side of the flower and the one side of the mouse is cut, so we'll have a window for both together on the front of the card. Okay, so now we can score along that pencil line. just above and below the die cutting only. Then we can fold it and cut off all those silly looking extra pieces that are sticking out. I'm putting liquid adhesive on the back half of my flower and positioning it right into the die cut window. And I'll do the same with the mouse after that. And I think this is a really cool technique because you've got these two images together hanging off the edge of the card. By the way, in all of today's examples, I did the off-the-edge stamping on the left side of the card, but you could rotate this card and have everything hanging off the top of the card. Okay, so now I'm going to trim this down so that I have a 5.5 by 4.25 inch note card. You can trim it any way you want. This one's actually going to be a wider card instead of a taller card. I thought that would be a fun, different type of card design. Just as long as the edge of your die cutting to the edge of the card still fits in the envelope. So here it is finished. I stamped a few little dandelion pieces up there on the top and made tiny little dots with my glitter dust pen. I also added a little bit of glitter to the dandelion and to the ear and cheeks of the mouse, so they had sparkle too. And by the way, if you're an on-the-go colorer like me, you can go and color a ton of these images, come back, die cut them, and quickly put this card together. I actually had colored a bunch of these images while playing Sorry with my daughter, so I have some more to create cards. So here's just another example. Now I created the card in the exact same way that I just showed you, with two images. But this time I used the mushroom and a fairy that are included in that kit. Now I wanted to show you another fun thing that you could do to the background. Instead of just doing stamping on it, I added some die cutting for a tone-on-tone look. So this is a white background and I'll add white die cutting. I used this new background die from Hero Arts called the Dandelion Leaves Frame Die. It's a beautiful frame with a little fairy sitting in it. You could even cut the fairy out so it's just the leaves and butterfly. And that's what I did on today's example. I actually didn't use all of the background, just parts of it, since the white part of my card is narrow and this is much too big for it. So I'm just putting glue on the back of certain areas that I want to include, and then I'll place that on the top of my card, and anything hanging off I'll just trim away. I ended up really liking this version where we had the white on white die cutting. So anytime you have a simple card that you think you need a little something extra, I recommend trying this. Look through your die cuts for any kind of detailed dies that you may have, and you can add them for a tone-on-tone look on the background. So here's the finished card. Fits in the envelope nicely because we cut it down to be the overall size of a card, including the part hanging off. I added lots of shimmer to her wings with the Stardust pen, and I added nothing else to the background other than the tone-on-tone die cutting. I really feel like keeping the rest of the card simple is best since the interest is in the image hanging off the edge. Okay, so now for a different type of technique, a variation of this. In this case, the stamping is on the front of the card. There's no window, and it still is hanging off the edge. So this is just another option to do off-the-edge stamping. Now this time I do start with a 5.5 by 8.5 inch piece of white cardstock with a pencil line down the center, but this time I stamped directly on that piece, right along the pencil line. I already did my coloring too. I'm placing my die cut around it, and this time we're going to partially die cut on the other side. Remember how last time I rotated it before I put it in here? This time we keep it straight, and I'm die cutting the left portion of the fairy right up to the pencil line. So now we can score above and below it, fold along the score line, and then we have our fairy hanging off the edge. So she's stamped on the front of the card this time, not glued to the inside. It's just a different option. It's totally up to you which you prefer. This one does look a little bit better when you open it up, but neither of the designs bother me. It's totally personal preference. I again am trimming the card down so that the total width is 4.25 and the height is 5.5. Now check this out when you open it up. The die cut flips and kind of closes itself up. So it's just another design option. And I have a third for you at the end of this video. So here is the final card, fits in the envelope nicely. All I did was add a sentiment to this, some of the Stardust glitter pen to the top of her wand and her wings. And then I added some gemstones coming up from the wand. I thought that would add some fun sparkle too. It's a very simple design, but it has the fun interest and the unique look of that image hanging off the edge. You could even be real clever and make it so images hang off both edges with doing double partial die cutting. I might do that in a future video. And by the way, the coloring on this one isn't with Copic markers. In this case, I use my luminous pencils. I've had these forever. My friend Lydia talked me into getting them, and I'm glad she did. I wish I would have started using them sooner. I'll link to Lydia's channel here. She has some great videos and shows how to use these, and I will also in a future video. Okay, so now the last example. This is definitely the easiest and most obvious for creating off-the-edge stamping. But I wanted to share it with you in case you don't like the die cutting that shows with the other options. I also used some patterned paper on these examples because a lot of people were saying they wished I used more. I tend to use pattern paper in small amounts, as I did here. This is a Sunny Studio pattern paper that I love. It's tone on tone with stripes. Fantastic. I'll link to it below. Right between the two pattern pieces, I put a thin strip of white cardstock that I colored with the glitter Stardust pen so that there's a sparkly stripe in the background. Now, in this case, I just created a narrow card and I glued my little fairy to the edge. So there's no partial die cutting trick. She's just hanging off the edge of a narrow card. This is obviously the cleanest when you open it up. However, I think it lacks some of the fun of being a continuous kind of one-layer card, but it's another option that you can try. And by using just small strips of the pattern paper, I can keep the focus on the sentiment and on the image, but add something fun to the background. You can see that shimmer stripe that I created by coloring on white cardstock and how it pulls everything together nicely. And by the way, the little dots coming up from the wand, I just created those with the Stardust glitter pen too. All right, there you have a few different ways to create off-the-edge stamped cards. I hope you'll give this a try. It's a really fun way to make something a little bit different and unexpected. If you are interested in the supplies that I use, they are all linked below in that YouTube description, but I have a lot more information over on my blog if you want to check that out. And in the middle here are a couple other off-the-edge stamp videos that I've done. I appreciate the time that you spend with me. I always do. I hope you'll return and have a great week.